Welcome to the Grow Your Independent Consulting Business podcast. I'm Melisa Liberman, a fellow IC and business coach. On this podcast, I teach you to become a consistently booked independent consultant without becoming a pushy salesperson or working 24/7. If I can do it, you can too. Listen on to find out how. Welcome to episode 202 of the Grow Your Independent Consulting Business podcast. This is Melisa Liberman, and today I'm excited to talk with you about how to build a consulting business that lasts, lessons from the last 200 episodes, should be 201 episodes now, and 12 years in business. So this is part two. Last week, we went through part one. So if you haven't yet listened to that, no problem. So listen through this one and then you can go back because they're two standalone episodes, but very much related. And in total, give you the top 10 lessons learned from my last 12 years in business as an independent consultant and coach for independent consultants, and the last 200 episodes. If you heard me last week, I'll just repeat quickly. And then this episode will be its own standalone, no more repetition after I tell you this, which is, really when I was thinking back upon these last 200 episodes and taking away the lessons learned, that's really a very integrated part of my business is constant evaluation and looking back at what's working and what's not working and making adjustments and, experimentation. And so, as part of all of that, I was reflecting on the last 200 episodes, which is definitely a milestone. And I was, really capturing what are my lessons learned? What has kept me going? What have I learned along the way? And as I was doing that, I realized that not only are they lessons for the podcast itself, but really they're lessons for staying in business for 12 almost 13 years and still going, even though sometimes it's, really not an easy path, as you well know. So that is the impetus for today's episode and last week's episode, which is a two-part series. And like I said, I'm going to go through the 5 out of the 10 lessons learned today. And then you can always go back if you didn't catch it already to last week's episode 201 and hear the first 5 of the 10 lessons learned. So that is how this is structured. We're going to go through I'm going to recap the first 5 for you, and then I'll talk about what the next 5 are. And then at the end, I will repeat all of them so that you can hear everything at one time. All right. With that, let's dive in. So today's agenda is we're going to go through how this applies to you. So these are my lessons learned, but very simply put, this is not just my lessons learned, but certainly themes I hear over and over again in working with independent consultants and boutique consultancy owners on a daily basis. And so we'll talk about how does this episode apply to you. I will give you a word of caution, and then we'll dive into those number 6 through 10 of the lessons learned from the last 200 episodes and 12 plus years in business. And then we'll wrap it up today with how to put this episode into action. All right. So that is what we're here for. Let us talk through first the companion resource that goes with today's episode. If you haven't done it lately or ever, I highly recommend you go to take the Consultant's Business Health Check. There are 14 areas of your business that can be really valuable to baseline and continuously evaluate your scores against, how you're improving or where your business has room for optimization. So you can take that health check at icassessment.com, the 2 letters IC for independent consultant assessment.com. And that'll give you a great baseline as we start off this year. All right. So with that, let's talk just quickly about how this applies to you. And then we'll dive into the first of the 5 lessons learned. How does this apply to you? I am sharing my experiences just upon reflecting back and those learnings, and really doing that for 3 reasons. Of course, I do it for my own business, but I don't always share with you everything from my own business. I'm sharing with you these lessons learned because they really stood out to me in a meaningful way as lessons that you can learn as an independent consultant, whether you've been in business for 1 month or 1 year or 10 years, to help you avoid making the same mistakes I've made. And I see so many other independent consultants making, to help you recognize if you've already started making the mistakes, so you can recognize that you're in that pattern and shorten the cycle of it. And then thirdly, as I mentioned last week, normalizing the fact that we're all learning, we're all growing, we're all making mistakes. And the best case and course outcome from making those mistakes is that you're learning from them, that we're, all of us collectively as independent consultants are learning from these mistakes and not allowing us and not allowing you to avoid taking risks, to avoid dreaming big, to avoid setting a vision that you didn't think was possible to achieve. We definitely don't want that to happen for you. What I would love to happen for you is to hear this episode and last week's as well, and to take away that, whatever you're doing is probably very common. Whatever challenges you might be facing or lessons you've been learning is very common. And so it's not a sign that you're not cut out for this. It's not a sign that you have to settle for mediocrity. It's not a sign that somehow you've plateaued. It's a sign that you're on the right path in terms of being a business owner, and that this is a constant evolution. So that's why I'm sharing this with you. And I certainly want to warn you also, here's my word of caution, that, to really think about what I'm sharing here today. You might think to yourself, this doesn't apply to me, or I'm not doing that. And I would really caution you to say, if you're really dismissing something right off the bat, it might be a good flag for you to say, you know what? This needs some further investigation. If I'm just dismissing something, thinking that doesn't apply to me or that's not possible for me, or whatever your initial reaction is, it could be a really important sign to notice, which is a lot of times when something kind of touches us in a certain way, we want to push it away instead of it noticing that that's an indicator that it could be a growth area. So that is my but first or but Melissa segment here before we dive into number 6 through 10 of the 10 lessons that I've learned in the last 12 years of doing business and the last 200 podcast episodes. All right, let's go straight to the heart of it. Number 6 is emotions matter. Listen, I think I've told you this story on the podcast before, but when I was in corporate, there were a lot of really challenging moments, as I'm sure you also had. I remember so distinctly being in the CEO's, office around the board table in board meetings, and it got very heated. It got very personal. There were a lot of times where the CEO was yelling and criticizing and throwing people under the bus and all those things that happen. And I remember so vividly having a paperclip that I would use to stab my finger while this was happening so I wouldn't start crying, in the middle of a board meeting, of executive meeting. That is an indicator of my past ability to manage emotions, which was basically through, physical harm was the only way I could control my emotions because I was so bad at managing them. And I share that very story with you because in business, we're taught so often that we shouldn't have emotion, that we're weak if we have emotion, that we are more ineffective if we have any form of an emotion other than excitement or motivated or confident. And so that's just such a learn. And I've told you before, I grew up on a cattle ranch. There's really no emotion involved in that type of a lifestyle either. There's no, I'm not in the mood today because there's, 2,000 animals that are relying. And I'm not just exaggerating. There's literally 2,000 animal, or there was not, maybe my parents have reduced the herd a little bit now, but there used to be 2,000 animals that they were responsible for. And so there's no emotion. Like my entire life, emotions were not a good thing. Well, let's just put it that way. And so, with that learned behavior, that you might not have grown up on a cattle ranch, but likely you also, encountered those messages that emotions are not wanted in business. And so, as a result, we learn through our lives, at least I have, up until, a certain point, and I'll share with you what that was in a moment, that we should just ignore them, put them away, avoid them, stuff them down, whatever you need to do to keep stabbing yourself with a paperclip, whatever you need to do to keep from having any form of an emotion that's other than confidence, basically. And so I'm sharing this with you because that's the baseline from which I started my business. And from that baseline, I recall so clearly being it was such a cliff that I went off of when I left, resigned from my corporate executive role. And I no longer had a title. I no longer had a name of a business behind me. I no longer had a team of how many ever 100 or whatever it was. I no longer had a corner office. I didn't have any of that. And so, because I had based all of my confidence off of those external things, when I resigned, I had none of it. I was starting back from, in my mind, it felt like I was starting back from as if I were just graduating from college in so many ways. And so, coming from that emotion of insecurity, and then I shared with you for 3 or 4 years, I took on roles that my past network came to me with. I wasn't discerning or picky at all. I just did whatever someone wanted me to do for the price they suggested. And that was that. But then when I decided I want this to be a real business, that's when I started taking, more scary, we'll call it, action. And when you come from an action from the place of insecurity and self doubt, it dilutes it. So I could show you the spreadsheet. I had hundreds of networking calls, hundreds from a place when I first started, probably the first 100 out of the, it was probably 200 or more calls. At least the first half were coming from a place of insecurity and self doubt and lack of confidence. And that diluted the action of those networking calls. They went nowhere. Almost all of them went nowhere because I wasn't coming across very confidently. I wasn't coming across with certainty. A lot of cases even knew why we were on the call, except for just to get to know each other. It wasn't until I started building more confidence ahead of time, ahead of results. It wasn't until I learned how to generate confidence. So, along this way, I should insert that, along this way, having all these networking calls, I realized something wasn't right. I wasn't exactly sure what it was. I thought maybe it was a way I was doing it. I didn't realize it was the emotion from which I was doing it. So, found a coach. I found a coach and I found a coaching program and I found, got into that world of mindset. And I started realizing the issue wasn't what I was saying or how I was networking. It was about the emotional state that I had while doing it. And I learned through that process from coaches I hired early on that I could generate confidence ahead of time. I didn't need a title behind me. I didn't need a company name behind me or a corner office or a team. I didn't need any of that. I could create my own confidence and go on those networking calls with a greater sense of purpose, from clarity, with more boldness. And that's what started turning around my results. It wasn't that I just did a lot of those and got lucky. It was because I started creating confidence ahead of time. It was because when I started feeling confused or overwhelmed, I was able to redirect that from a mindset perspective and an emotional state perspective in order to be more clear, in order to be more confident, in order to be more of a leader, on those types of calls, networking calls. And that doesn't mean that the fear went away. It doesn't mean that the insecurity went away, but it means that I figured out the way to notice that that was happening and redirect myself and shorten the cycles and get myself into a more confident state before a networking call so that it would be productive for both of us, for both myself and the other person on the call. No one wants to get on a call with someone who's kind of looking to that other person to make them feel more confident. So that's the example for you of why emotions matter and why that is lesson number 6 out of 10. Just as a quick reminder, if you somehow made it to the middle of this episode, the first 5 are in the last episode, 201. So number 6, emotions matter. Emotions matter. As much as we want to stuff them down, as much as we want to avoid them, if we've learned those behaviors like I did, the opposite is the most beneficial, which is learning how to manage them, learning how to process them and see them through so that they don't linger. And so they don't get to the point where it's so stuffed down that you have to use a paperclip to try to avoid crying. I never feel that sensation anymore of crying in a meeting because I manage my emotions. If I had learned that when I was in my 20s and early 30s, things would have been so much better on all accounts. So, at least the experience of creating a startup would have been, that's for sure. So, that was lesson number 6, emotions matter. Number 7, leverage quick decision making cycles. I used to weigh decisions for weeks, for months, sometimes for years. Should I do this? Should I do that? I wonder about this. And it just created this overhead, if you will, of and a debt, really a debt, a decision making debt of decisions that I was sitting on or sleeping on that I hadn't made. And I would look back at the end of the year and kick myself that I just hadn't done the thing that I had an inclination to do. And so as I started growing my consulting business and really this podcast also, I started to realize that I would benefit so much more from stopping to overanalyze and getting into analysis paralysis and jumping in and not worrying about making mistakes and not worrying about, oh no, should I have done something different? Or what was the opportunity cost of this? Or did it cost me too much money? Or did it waste my time? Like all of those things as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, can be incredibly debilitating, having all of those second guessing going on. And so, what I've been doing is really leveraging and implementing this as a core process in my business and my podcast, but leveraging quick decision making cycles. What that looks like is just jumping in. I remember it was, let's see, August of 2023. It was August of 2023. I had been wanting to write a book and the time never seemed right. I wasn't exactly sure how to even do that or how long it would take. But I had come across a publisher, an indie publisher, and I set up a meeting with her. And my intention in going that into that meeting was I want to tell her that I want to start the book in January. January. So this is August. That January would be the best time in my life and in my business to start the book. But let's just like get the ball rolling. That was my intention. Well, I got off the call and I had signed up to write a book immediately. And it was just using my intuition that this can work. I know she can help me make it happen and this can be successful. And honestly, January, even though I had, some projects lined up that I needed to shift a little bit and a vacation, I knew I could figure out a way to work around all of that. And so I just said, fine, let's do it. And we started in September. That was August. I made the decision. It was like 2 weeks later or something. I think I did go on a vacation. And then we started the book process and we released it at the end of January. I had been told by other book coaches that it's a year-long process. It's a process that takes as long as you're going to take. And quite frankly, the prevalence of I did use ChatGPT a tiny bit writing the book, in all honesty, mostly to edit the book. Like little sections of the book I would paste in there that I had already personally written. And then I would ask what suggestions it had to improve or clarify that section. So I did a little bit of that, but I wrote all of that book. It wasn't any chat GBT happening over there, like, as prevalent as it is now. And so anyway, I always say to myself, it's kind of like you're writing the last manuscript on a typewriter before the computer, the word processor is invented. But I'm happy that I did it. I'm happy that I went through that process. And it's an example of just making a quick decision. It's not a perfect decision. It's an imperfect decision and being okay with that because it helps you to just keep moving and keeping in momentum and keeping to follow your intuition in order to create really massive results. Creating a book that quickly is not a super common situation. And so that's an example of making a quick decision and not overanalyzing it, and the significant impact that it had on my business. And for you, I wonder, what might you be sitting on? What idea might you be waiting until there's a perfect time to implement it? And instead of waiting for the perfect time or analyzing a decision or overanalyzing a decision or getting yourself into analysis paralysis, what would happen if you decided, you know what, I'm going to just dive in? I don't know if it's the right answer or not. I don't know if it's better than another option, but this is the thing that my intuition is telling me to do. And when you take action, it gives you data, it gives you inputs, it gives you the ability to say, okay, this is working or this isn't working. But you not taking the action and trying to foresee all of those things is so difficult, if not impossible. It's so much better to get in the middle of it and then figure out, oh, I didn't really think about it that way, rather than just trying to theoretically imagine what it might be like and if it's a good idea for you or not. So if you're feeling called to something in your business, if you're feeling as if a path that is a good one for you, whether it's, anything in your business, lead generation, the way you sell, the offers that you have, the assets like a book or a podcast that you want to create, go do it. And then give yourself a permission to evaluate after getting through some portion of it and deciding if this is a good thing that you want to continue with. You don't have to. You can decide and change your mind at any point. You get to decide. No one else decides for you. But certainly that path of ruminating or analyzing is definitely one that dilutes your cycles. The other thing that I'll say with respect to quick decision making is the opposite too, is knowing, you know what, this isn't the right thing right now. And I'm going to decide not to even reconsider it until next quarter. That's another decision. It doesn't always have to be yes. The decision isn't always yes, but making a decision is the key here. Making a decision even when you don't feel like you're ready, and making a decision that no, now is not the right time, and being okay with either of those, and just evaluating and, re-examining after some set period of time that you give yourself. That's the lesson that I want to share that is so critical, that I often see independent consultants falling into that trap of wanting, over analyzing and then just delaying the results that they could be having. Okay, number 8. Number 8 of 10. You are not entitled to success. I am not entitled to success. How I'll describe this one is, it's helpful to hear hard things. That is the lesson that I learned. It was maybe 3 years ago, 4 years ago now, maybe longer. It is helpful to hear hard things. And let me tell you how that relates to being entitled. I was successful in corporate, as you probably were too. Likely you were. I had a title, I had a corner office, I had a team, I had all those things. And I left, as I was describing it a minute ago, and I felt like I was starting over. I felt like I was new, I was unqualified, I was incompetent. But at the same time, I deep down felt like I should be able to figure out things quickly because I had before. And I felt like my results should come quickly. Like I should be able to double my corporate salary because I saw other people doing that. And I shared with you in episode 200 the idea of what's possible for you and using that as inspiration. But for me, I wasn't using it as inspiration. I was using it as a weapon against myself to say, why are other people achieving their goals more quickly? In comparing myself to them and wondering what they had that I didn't, or why, when I had more experience than they had, that they were succeeding faster than I did. Like terrible comparisons that probably weren't even accurate, but that's what my mind was doing. And I became so discouraged and frustrated. And I questioned whether this was a path for me as an independent consultant, because I felt entitled to success. I felt entitled to success, if I'm just being super honest with you. And I just wanted someone to tell me what to do, as I had, in corporate. I didn't have to be told what to do at a granular level, but I wasn't the one setting revenue targets. The CEO was. He decided that this was our revenue target, and then I had to go figure out how to make it happen. Usually it was some outrageous number, and I would get somewhat close to it. So that was the picture that I was coming at this from. And so thinking about it from that perspective, I was expecting to be successful at this fairly quickly because I was seeing others being successful and I felt like I had good experience to come at this. And so I just started getting so frustrated and discouraged when I wasn't catching up to where I thought I should be in comparison to these peers and colleagues. And I just wanted someone to tell me what to do. Like I was describing the CEO telling me, okay, this is your revenue number. Go make it happen. This is the margin we want to have. Go make it happen. But no one was there to tell me what to do. I hired a coach. I wanted her to tell me what to do. And in some ways she did. But in a lot of ways, she was, expecting me to figure out what I needed to do based on the coaching. She wasn't telling me, go finish this project. It wasn't that detailed. And so it kind of came to a head one day. She was a coach who had offered the ability to text her. So I was texting her probably nonstop. And she finally wrote me back and she was like, listen, you're in a bad kind of mind frame right now, frame of mind right now. You're coming at me in a very entitled way, entitled not toward her, but entitled in general toward my business, that I should be more successful than I am more quickly. And in some ways, being a victim, having a victim mentality, tell me what to do. And this isn't my fault. It's, you need to do better at telling me what to do, kind of thing. And it was not easy to hear. In fact, I'll never forget that exchange. It was pretty brutal being told that you're coming across as entitled and victimy. That doesn't sound good or feel good at all. But it really was a turning point for me. It really was because I started to realize that number one, I wasn't entitled to any success at any pace compared to anyone else. And it was all on me. And it had nothing to do with comparisons to other people. And so it helped me to see that I could make my success inevitable, which to me, I felt like it was. I felt like I would figure this out. I knew at my core that I didn't know what I was doing, but I knew I was someone who could figure it out. I knew I was someone who was resilient enough or committed enough to figure it out, but I wasn't entitled to success in a certain way or a certain time frame. And that's what I was going at my business with, is really feeling like this should happen in a certain time frame because I'm seeing it happen for other people in that time frame, or I should be able to replace my corporate income somehow in the first year. I feel kind of entitled to that, if we're just being honest here, which we are. So you may or may not relate to that specific example, but what I will tell you is that it's very helpful to hear hard things. It's so helpful to have a mirror that comes up toward you and says, you know what? You're getting in your own way right now. You're making this harder than it has to be. And so that's the eighth of the 10 lessons learned, is that it's helpful to hear hard things. And I shared with you a very personal example there. And I hope you have someone in your life, in your business, who can give you that hard feedback, that direct feedback, like a coach can, that says, you know what, you're getting in your own way. It's not because it's anything wrong with you. It's because you're a human and you're getting in your own way, which our brain is designed to do to protect the status quo, and helping you to see that so you can keep moving forward and not making things so difficult for yourself. All right. Lesson number 9 out of 10. Encouraging failure. It's important to encourage failure as part of your process, which might sound very counterintuitive. I know for me it did. I remember distinctly, and I think I've shared this on the podcast before too, which is I remember so distinctly telling one of my colleagues, one of my consultant friends, I've never failed and I won't start now. And I think I was saying that more in the macro sense, which is true. I do believe that about myself. It might take me 10 years. It might take me 5 years. It might take me 20 years, but I'm not going to fail in the long run. I will figure it out. I feel like that mentality is fairly ingrained in my brain. However, it was at a micro level too in those first years of doing business, and even sometimes still today, less so, but still. The idea of avoiding failure So many of us do this. When I first started my business, I was so hesitant to set any goals because I felt like I had no control over them. And so, why set a goal if you don't know if you could reach it? It was my mentality. Why set a goal if I'm going to fail or there's possibility I might not achieve it? Why go after a new specialization or niche when I'm not sure if I can, figure it out? All of those types of things in the beginning were so prevalent in my mindset. I was so worried about failing that I would just play so small and not set goals or set goals that were kind of a slam dunk in order to make myself feel better. And what I've learned is on a macro level, again, it's so important to have that belief in yourself that you're not going to fail. You're someone who will figure it out. And you likely have that, or most of the time anyway. But it's on the micro level. It's on the smaller level when you're setting goals or when you're deciding what you want to accomplish this month or this quarter or this year, figuring out, you know what, I'm going to set a goal. It might be kind of crazy, but I'm going to go for it. And I'm going to figure out who I need to become in order to make that goal a reality. I'm going to figure out what strategy I need to implement to make that goal a reality. And I'm going to figure out what processes and routines I need to implement in order to make that a reality. And I'm going to commit to them and I'm going to put them in place and I'm going to evaluate and figure out what's working and what's not working and what I want to adjust. And that process of failing fast, of failing often, will build a muscle and break down the fear and the self doubt and help you to get to the point where, even though you might still have it, I do. For sure, I do. I don't know. Maybe at the 15th year of business, I won't. But right now, it's just part of it. But it doesn't have to slow you down. It doesn't have to stop you. It doesn't have to make you change directions. And so failing fast and failing often and setting a goal that might seem outrageous, but going for it anyway so that you can learn from it and improve and optimize and progress is the key here. So that is my ninth lesson learned, which is encouraging failure instead of avoiding failure. And then number 10, getting help isn't weak. As I've described to you today, going back to my corporate days, I rarely would ask anyone who I didn't trust immensely a question or show that I didn't know how to do something. Part of it was probably born from being fairly young executive. I think I was on the executive team like at age 29 or 30. Some of it was definitely just general insecurities I had from growing up on a cattle ranch and thinking of myself in a non-professional way. But that armor that I had built up in corporate, I realized fairly early on in my business that definitely was not going to serve me as a business owner. That getting help, just like we help our clients, right? Our clients seek our expertise to achieve the goals that they have, to implement something that they want to implement that perhaps they don't have the internal knowledge or the capacity to handle. That's what we're hired for. So, certainly, why wouldn't we hire others to do the same thing for us? For me, I felt like there was some kind of hero almost in accomplishing goals all by myself. And so, for a long time in my business, I never wanted help with anything. I definitely would never tell anyone I didn't know what I was doing. I definitely would never share with anyone, especially any of the things I even just told you on this podcast. It was just mortifying to me and felt so dangerous in a lot of ways. And so as I started realizing, you know what, I've got to get help in different areas. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how to market myself or sell my services or run a business or any of these things. So when I decided I wanted a business rather than just referrals from friends and former colleagues, that was the key. One of the big keys to success is saying, you know what? There's not a problem. There's nothing wrong with me for wanting help. In fact, that's what I sell is giving help to people as a consultant and a coach. And so I'm going to be a product of my own product and I'm going to start asking for help and just being super vulnerable, honest, transparent. And I just feel like a completely different person as a result of that. And I know for sure I wouldn't have the same results that I have today. And for sure, I talk to so many consultants who are in the same spot where they tell me, I feel nervous asking for help. I feel nervous telling someone that I don't know what I'm doing. I feel nervous that I'm not further along than I am right now. I should be. And what I want to say to you is there's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with getting help. There's nothing wrong with hiring expertise to help you get further faster. That's a smart business strategy, right? Just like our consulting clients get from us. And so that's the 10th lesson that I learned is there's no armor needed here. There's so much benefit in being honest with yourself, honest with others to get the help you need, to figure out how to even figure out where your weak spots are, and then start building up the skill set and the mindset and the strategy to overcome whatever that is and move yourself and grow up the ladder to where you want to be. From potentially, you might be in the spot right now where your business is dependent on referrals, for example, figuring out getting help to get to the place where you're sought after for a consultant and have a reputation for what you do. So that was the 10th, is getting help isn't weak. Let me recap all 10 of them, and then we'll talk about how to put this episode into action. Number 1, have a compelling reason. Number 2, who before how. Number 3, mindset matters. Number 4, build a relationship with your expertise. Number 5, invest in your business. Number 6, emotions matter. Number 7, leverage quick decision-making cycles. Number 8, it's helpful to hear hard things. Number 9, encourage failing in your business. And number 10, getting help isn't weak. So today you listened to number 6 through 10. You can go back to last week's episode if you want to hear or rehear 1 through 5. And as you think about putting this episode into action for your business, really go back through these 10 lessons learned and figure out which of the 1 or 2 really is most applicable to you and your business right now, and start working on them. Start figuring out, okay, this lesson out of the 10 is most relevant to my business right now. How can I apply that? How can I incorporate that into the process and the steps that I have to achieve the goals that I want to achieve this year? Pick 1 or 2 out and focus on them. You can't boil the ocean. You can't tackle all 10 of them at once. And you likely have other lessons learned from your own business that you also want to tackle. Really think about what is the 1 or 2 things that you want that will really move the needle for you, and then commit to getting more clear about what the root causes of those challenges are and start working on overcoming them so that you can move toward your goals and grow the business and yourself as a business owner in that direction. All right, my friend, as you think about putting today's episode into action, I want to remind you to go take the Consultant's Business Health Assessment. It's at icassessment.com, the 2 letters IC for Independent Consultant Assessment.com. And if you're interested in getting one-on-one help from a coach who specializes in independent consultants and micro consultancies, reach out. Let's see if we're a good fit working together. You can find a spot on my calendar at consultmelissa.com, and I will see you again next week. Take care. Thanks for joining me this week on the Grow Your Independent Consulting Business podcast. If you liked today's episode, I have 3 quick next steps for you. First, click subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to make sure you don't miss future episodes. Next, leave me a review in your podcast app so other independent consultants can find and benefit too. And finally, to put the ideas from today's episode into action, head over to melisaliberman.com for the show notes and more resources to help you grow your consulting practice from your first few projects into a full-fledged business. See you next week.